Remember that little thing called the streaming wars?
And here it comes. It's finally here. The streaming wars are hitting the high gear today.
The streaming wars are escalating with Disney Plus launching today. It's the latest streaming service competing with current offerings like Netflix, Hulu, CBS All Access, and Apple TV.
COVID was a huge disruptor for the media industry, and it really gave a boost to a lot of these stocks like Netflix, Roku, and Disney that had huge runs over 2020. But now that we're in year 3 of this mess, I was really interested to find out just how much the industry was changing and what's next for a lot of these streamers. So I hopped on Zoom with John Harrison, who heads the global entertainment and media division over at EY. He puts out a report every year on the trends that will shape the media industry. One number I was really struck by as I was doing my research was just how much money streamers are putting into content. Now, the top 8 media groups here in the US are projected to spend something close to $140 billion on content this year. That's up 10% over last year. And the thing is, a lot of these companies are still losing money on their video streaming services.
The pivot to streaming is absolutely the top strategic priority for the big media companies. And the thing you have to have for success above all is a huge lineup of exclusive, appealing content. And because the season is continually running in streaming, there is no season like we had in traditional television. The constant need to refresh the portfolio of content is going to remain. So I think the investment will only continue to grow from here.
And John says big media companies like Netflix and Amazon aren't just throwing cash at content, but they're also heavily investing in the user experience.
Yeah, with all the new services that have been launched, the streaming landscape for consumers has gotten so complex. And it's the number of services, it's finding which program on which service to watch. And consumers are also spending a lot of money on services. And there's going to be a push towards making that experience more simplified and more customized, whether that's through content recommendation engines, or making the technology experience as seamless as possible in terms of signing up or switching across devices, or finding a way to do creative bundling with additional services, whether it's a partnership with a music streaming service or a wireless provider. We've seen some of that already in the market today, or offering discounts on consumer products, or even something like an NFT. I think the media companies are going to get creative to create as much of a flywheel to keep subscribers on the platform as they possibly can.
People are paying a lot for these services, and you see some platforms like Netflix, possibly instituting rate increases here pretty soon. Do you think that there's going to come a point where they're going to have to pick growth and show investors profitability over putting money into more and more content?
Yeah, I think that basically is probably the biggest trend we're going to see in the industry in 2022, which, at the end of 21, it seemed as if, at least in the US, streaming subscriber growth was starting to slow, still growing, but maybe not at the super high rates we'd seen in the past. And if that continues, it's important for media companies and investors alike that the focus will quickly turn towards what is the long-term profitability of these businesses and the cash flow that they can generate given the content investments they have to make. And so streaming companies and media companies with streaming services are going to have to pivot towards more of a focus on the long-term profit opportunity with streaming, and maybe away from just the all-out subscriber growth.
And you mentioned NFTs, and I think a lot of us are still trying to wrap our head just around what they are and how useful they can be. But you mentioned that as a trend. How are these media companies looking at that technology possibly as a way to really kind of engage and retain those subscribers?
Yeah, there's a lot of excitement around NFTs generally, and media companies are absolutely harnessing that excitement and putting their toes in the water into the marketplace. It's a way to drive engagement with their content, with their intellectual property that they haven't had in the past. And there's really no downside through the experimentation with NFTs, with the metaverse, as that continues to develop. And I think media companies will partner with technical specialists that can get them onto the right platforms and in the right systems to be able to offer NFTs to their consumers. And maybe down the road, there'll be a way to monetize them. But right now, economic returns aren't clear, but driving that engagement certainly would be a positive.
Another big trend on John's watch list, the return of the movie theater. After the dumpster fire that was 2020, movie ticket sales have slowly begun to rebound. But still, about half of pre-pandemic moviegoers aren't buying tickets yet, and theaters still have to compete with streaming services. And sorry to say, but even Nicole Kidman might not be enough to win back moviegoers. What is the state of the movie theater industry? Are people going to be going back to the movies, and can they survive?
I think so. I think obviously the pandemic totally hammered the movie theater industry throughout 2020 and through much of 2021. But as we exited 2021, and certainly with the success of Spider-Man, which was released in mid-December, really right in the face of Omicron becoming a reality in this country, that turned out to be one of the biggest box office successes of all time. And I think that just shows the enduring consumer interest in going to the movie theater to see big tentpole releases. So I think the studios recognize the value of the theatrical release for their biggest films. The theaters obviously do. And they've done a nice job of working with a first release window size of around 45 days to keep that window viable, while also recognizing the reality of streaming and enabling the studios to push those movies onto their direct-to-consumer properties shortly after they go through the theaters.
What emerging trend do you think is going to have the biggest impact on investors this year?
I think the emerging trend that will have the biggest impact will be media companies looking at their streaming businesses and identifying really what the long-term growth potential is, aligned with the amount of investment they have to put into those businesses to realize that growth, and making hard decisions around where they're going to put their programming to both power that growth forward, but protect the cash flow generation of the traditional ecosystem, which remains the most important financial contributor to the media industry today. So it's a tricky balance. It's a basic balance, growth versus cash flow, but it's a difficult one at this stage in the industry.
Well, thank you so much, John. Hey, it's Alexis here, and I really hope you enjoyed that video. Be sure to subscribe and leave a comment below, and thanks for watching.